it looks like we have a number of people in the audience already, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed the career fair if you were able to make it to that. Today, we're going to be discussing how to break into the peace and security field in the early stages of your career, whether that be, early out of college or if you're looking to switch fields, whatever your situation is. And maybe after the career fair, you have some questions, so I hope this will be a good chance for everyone to ask some of them and get some input from our really experienced and great panelists. So our panelists are going to talk about their experiences in government, think tanks, nonprofits, and the private sector. And we're lucky to have perspectives from both hiring staff and people who have, of course, been on the other side of that as applicants. And so I think that they'll be able to give you a lot of really diverse perspectives on what it's like trying to get into this field. So I'll introduce our panelists in a moment, but first, just want to introduce myself and my co-moderator, Nida. I'm Katie Votto. I'm the co-chair of our Forming the Future working group at WCAPS, and I'm also a senior research analyst at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C., where I focus on U.S. foreign and security policy in Northeast Asia. And Nida, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Neda. I'm the fellow at WCAPS. I'm an attorney in DC. I focus on international human rights. I also do want to note that I did put a poll up in the chat. So if you click over to the session and you see polls, we asked, what is your level of experience in peace and security? And I will.
Yeah, great. So if you could answer that, that would be a great way for us to get a sense of who's in the audience and tailor responses to you all. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Aisha Chaudhary. Aisha is now in the private sector, where she is Senior Director at Rice, Hadley, Gates, and Manuel, the strategic consulting firm led by Condoleezza Rice, Robert Gates, and Stephen Hadley. In this role, she manages the firm's clients who are interested in expanding their business in key international markets. And we've asked Aisha to also speak to her experience in government today. Before joining RHG, she worked as a professional staff member for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee covering South and Central Asia for then Senator John Kerry. And at the committee, she covered U.S. foreign policy in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Previously, she was the special assistant to the assistant administrator for Afghanistan and Pakistan affairs at USAID. And prior to her time in government, she worked at the Brookings Institution and the World Bank. So her experience clearly really spans across the field. So I'm sure she'll have a lot of really great perspective to give everyone. We also have Angela Winbow, who will give us some perspective from the think tank world. Angela is the recruitment and training coordinator supporting the operations team at the Center for Global Development. And in this role, she manages CGD's Summer Delegates Internship Program, implements and leads diversity and inclusion initiatives, and leads recruiting efforts within the DC office. And her professional background is in human resources, so she can give us quite a lot of input into the hiring process, I'm sure. Next, we have Christina Viad. Christina is Outreach Manager at Foreign Policy for America. In this position, Christina manages a national base of members advocating for diplomacy first, foreign policy, and principled American engagements in the world. She also leads political fundraising for candidates endorsed by FP4A's PAC, Foreign Policy Action Network. She raised over $3.5 million for candidates in 2019 to 2020 election cycle. And prior to joining FP4A, Christina worked as the program specialist at the Bridging the Gap project, supporting international relations scholars in the broader foreign policy community and developing policy relevant academic research on international politics. She's also held positions at the International Association of Women's Judges, as well as the Foreign and Commonwealth Office of the British Embassy. And last but not least, we have Kim Gillies. Kim is an Associate Director of Talent and Operations at West Exec Advisors, supporting day-to-day operations and the firm's organizational development, performance management, and employee engagement initiatives. Previously, she managed programming for entrepreneurs, activists, and innovators from around the world, selected for the U.S. State Department's Global Women's Mentoring Partnership. And Kim spent 3 years supporting the Executive Office of Inclusive Security, a leading advocacy organization in the field of women, peace, and security. So again, a really great selection of panelists with a lot of diverse experience. And first, I'd like to ask you all to briefly tell us about what your organizations do and what an entry-level position looks like there as well, and if possible, in your sector more broadly, though I understand there's a lot of diversity within each of these fields. So does anyone want to, maybe Kim, do you want to start us off?
I'd love to. And I'm very, as I just chatted, to try to get that rolling too, I'm very excited to learn from everyone else in this space, even though I've realized that I'm no longer like entry level, despite what I sometimes think forgetting my age. There's just always more to learn, and really interested in how different people's experiences are similar and different from my own. So West Exec Advisors is a strategic advisory firm that helps businesses, both in the private and nonprofit sectors, make the best possible decisions in our kind of volatile international landscape. So the two big buckets of work we do are, one, helping companies kind of navigate the public sector. So if it's a technology company who has a really cool service or product that could benefit the national security community, how could we help them understand how to engage effectively? When you have kind of, we'll use stereotypes of the capri or khaki wearing t-shirt, shorts, Silicon Valley, trying to connect with those in uniform at the Department of Defense, that just seems totally opaque, helping them kind of speak each other's languages. And the other bucket of work is recognizing global trends in foreign affairs and around the world, and helping businesses understand how that's going to impact kind of their core business and things that they should keep in mind.
Can you briefly, everyone, also just add what a entry-level position looks like at your organization?
Absolutely. So entry level, we are a really small team. So we have about 10 core staff, and then a roster of senior advisors and principals who all held senior levels in government previously. And entry-level positions, I think there's more difference, and I'd love to, again, hear from others, depending on the size of your organization than on the sector you're in. So from my experience as an employee and in hiring, the two buckets of work are basically operations focused or client delivery focused. Operations, meaning you're going to be helping with the day-to-day running of the office, you're going to be supporting scheduling, and you're going to be kind of wearing many hats depending on what the team needs at a certain point in time. And the client-facing side of the house is going to be research heavy. So you're the one who's doing that legwork or kind of note-taking and aggregating feedback and preparing the points for the senior staff to brief or kind of finalize for clients. So I'd say in both roles, the characteristics that I've noticed are really supporting. So how can you effectively anticipate needs? How can you manage up? How can you prepare your teammates to deliver best in service products and offerings for either the internal team or external clients? And I think just bringing that kind of professionalism to the role is definitely something that we look for and value in our entry level staff too, and just across our team, no matter what level you are.
Great. Maybe Aisha, do you want to also tell us, you're in the private sector now, but earlier you did spend a lot of time in government and in the Senate. So if you could, obviously there's a broad array of what an entry-level career looks like in government, but maybe if you could tell us how you got started and what those early career positions.
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's nice to meet everybody who's tuning in on this session. I started in government, I'm trying to think here, around 2010. And before I was in government, I sort of had what you would probably think of as a entry-level job in DC. I came to Washington, moved here from London after finishing a master's degree and was really just looking for any sort of policy job, and spent a year at the World Bank and then landed at the Brookings Institution for almost 4.5 years. And it was probably one of my more formative job experiences. And in in any sort of research assistant, research analyst job, you've got a boss who's researching X issue, and you're supporting them in research and analysis. I think it's pretty standard among most think tanks in DC. But I think what's really important about those sorts of positions is who you sort of end up working with, and how they can sort of advocate for you in your next job. And so at the point around 2008, 2009, 2007, the presidential election was going on, and my boss happened to be advising then candidate Obama, and sort of pulled me into debate talking points, and just pulled me into the sort of policy team, which is a really great thing to do if you're able to. If your boss is working for a presidential candidate and wants you to help out, always say yes. So that's how I sort of ended up going into government, was having spent that time, working on the campaign voluntarily, but, doing my sort of research assistant job at Brookings. So I sort of told him, I wanted to go in, and what should I do? Who should I talk to? And he was really instrumental and so supportive in helping me navigate, this behemoth of the government, which is very hard to understand, especially if you're going in as a political appointee. Even if you're not just the foreign service system, the civil service system, there's so many different mechanisms to go in. But that's how I sort of went in. And for those of you who maybe haven't worked in government, a lot of the jobs, I think that would be considered entry level. It really sort of depends on your background and experience. So if you want to go sort of the route of working on sort of administrative issues, admin type work, that is something that you can do. And that's sort of when you're working more on sort of scheduling, HR issues, etc. If that's what you're interested in, that's one path to take. If you want to work on maybe sort of a core substantive issue or a particular region, etc., that's sort of another path that you can take. I ended up being what's called a special assistant. And what I always love to say about the special assistant role is that there's nothing special about being a special assistant. You're just sort of working all the time. So those sorts of roles are great, especially if you're young, because usually that means you have more energy and more time on your hand to devote to this job. But you just are taking in everything. It's sort of like a deputy chief of staff or a chief of staff role. I was working for someone who ran the Afghanistan and Pakistan office at USAID, and at that time we were sort of at the height of the war. There was a lot going on between the US-Pakistan relationship. There was a lot of attention focused on it from the White House. So it was good for us because our issues were always being talked about in DC and PC meetings, but that just means you had to work. There was just always a lot going on. The great thing about those jobs is that you're sort of drinking from a fire hose. There's so much to take in. You're not only sort of managing your boss and making sure he has what he needs, but you're also working very closely. I was sort of managing an 80-person team, making sure they had what they needed. So those are sort of the different, I don't know how much detail I should be giving, Catherine, but those are, I would say, one of the better positions to have if you ever get an opportunity in government.
No, that's great. Thank you. Especially very relevant now with the transition going on. So that's great. And I also, I'm sure that Neda has had the same experience, but the point about having a boss that is willing to advocate for you is so important in this field. So much is, personality dependent, and networking is a big deal for better or for worse. So I think that's a really important point. And Angela, so Aisha talked a little bit about think tanks, but do you want to tell us about a little bit more about Center for Global Development and what entry-level positions look like there, and maybe since you are involved in hiring, what sort of experience people need to get into those entry-level positions?
And I'll just say for people watching, if there's any background noise, there's construction going on in my apartment, so just ignore if you can. I'm trying to myself. Yeah, so I actually am newer to the think tank space. As you mentioned, my background is in human resources, and so in moving to DC, it was my first time applying for a role at a nonprofit or a think tank. So it's kind of all brand new to me. But the Center for Global Development is essentially a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works to reduce global poverty by conducting rigorous research in our various program areas, and to basically inform policy to help that cause. So that's essentially what we do. And our areas of focus are global health policy, technology, education, governments and development for the UK and for the US, sustainable development finance, and migration, displacement, and humanitarian policy. So we're also kind of growing into more areas as well. Like we have a new gender program. We're trying to start up a new Africa specific program. So kind of just branching out in various ways. So we do have a couple of different options for entry-level positions. We have program coordinators, and we also have research assistants. So for both, they kind of, depending on the program team that you're on, they might look very similar because they're heavily administrative. A program coordinator is more so like the person who is maintaining scheduling, who is doing a little bit of data work, a little bit of quantitative work, depending on the need of the fellow or whoever the leader in charge of that program is. And I would say the research assistant it kind of can function as that depending on how large the team is. They might not need a PC, or the research assistant or RA will function as like both. But the RA will do a little bit more research and has an opportunity to add their voice and their work that they do to projects and things that are going on for their particular fellow that they're working under. So those are kind of what our entry-level positions look like. They're mostly admin, but they do, depending on who you're working under, they can add a lot of value to whatever your career plans are, as far as like being added on papers, like your name being, associated with a certain fellow and all of that. So there is that opportunity to, make career moves from those roles.
Absolutely. And then Christina, I mean, so things are also nonprofits, or most of them, but your organization definitely does something a lot different, and there's quite a lot of diversity in that sector as well. But if you could talk a little bit about FP for America and your experience in entry-level positions.
Sure. Yeah, so Foreign Policy for America is a little bit of a unique nonprofit in that we're a 501c4 advocacy organization at our core. We're an inherently political organization in that we have an affiliated PAC, Political Action Committee, and we do have a 501c3 foundation, which is kind of like an educational arm. I think this kind of trio of organizations under one umbrella is kind of common in the advocacy space, and you'll come across it a lot. But for us, we're a really small team. Kim, I think you said you guys have 10 core staff. I think we're around the same, maybe 8. We've got, a class of interns that we bring in each semester. There's 4 of them, and we're a growing team too. So there's a ton of opportunities, I think, when people come in to Foreign Policy for America to kind of grow into higher level positions, but also to kind of expand their teams at the entry level. So an entry level position will normally be at the associate level, So if you're working, say, on my team, it's the outreach associate. If you're working on the policy and legislative team, it's a policy associate. In that position, you're taking on a lot of responsibility, but you need to have those key admin skills that I think everyone has kind of brought up. I'm looking for people who have kind of event planning skills, social media skills, not necessarily because you'll be doing those things, but because it kind of shows you have the patience to take on, these big tasks that come, at these levels. Pieces, and we have done this before, where our fellows, we call them fellows, it's really more of an internship, so I don't want to be misleading. Our fellows, if they just finish school, they come and join us for a semester, and then full time. When that's happened, if they have like no job experience prior to joining us, we sometimes bring those people on at an assistant level, it's called, as kind of a 3-month preliminary introduction to the professional world, kind of make sure that it's a good fit before kind of giving them that associate title. So you have a little bit less responsibility, you're not taking on big projects, but kind of getting your toes wet, understanding the organization as a full-time employee at the assistant level and moving up to associate. But just to reiterate, what others said too, the key responsibilities there are administrative, with the knowledge, with the understanding that as a small organization, we're constantly looking to grow. Nonprofits, your budget hopefully will just continue to increase as you grow. So that leaves more room for us to promote people, move people up into a higher position, and kind of build out teams from there. I do have experience in other kind of strictly 501c3 nonprofits as well, and I think it's pretty similar in that the entry level positions look the same, but maybe the ability to move up from this associate to manager to senior director, that mobility is not as much there in kind of every nonprofit. So I don't want to mislead there, but it is for us.
Yeah, I think that's something that we want to address later as well, is just mobility general within this field. There are a lot of organizations, there's just a culture of you kind of go elsewhere to get more experience and come back and move up, and you jump around, which in some ways is really great, but it's also just a different, it can be a very difficult thing to navigate. So hopefully we have some time to come back to that later. I just want to, Nida's going to get into some of the other questions. I just want to briefly point out in our poll, so we have 4 students, we have 11 folks with 1 to 5 years experience, 3 with 5 to 10 years experience, and 5 people who are also looking to switch into the peace and security field, coming from experience in other fields. So just to give you a little context on who's listening in. And I'm also going to add another poll asking you all what kind of your biggest challenge has been in the job search, so that'll inform our other questions a little bit more. So I'm going to add that now. And
thank you, Katie. Thank you, everyone. So I'm actually going to combine our next 2 questions because I want to be sure that we have time at the end for Q&A. So my question to you is really, what do you look for in an employee when you're looking at their resume or when you're in an interview? What are the things you're looking for? And then with that, to combine the second question, what are some of the biggest mistakes that applicants can make that prevent them from getting those positions? And if it's okay, we'll just go in the same order. So I'll start again with you, Kim.
Sure. No, I love this question because we just went through a hiring process. So I am fresh off of reviewing resumes and doing phone screens. And I think the biggest thing that sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised, make your resume friendly. So think about your reviewer first and foremost, like, make sure that it is formatted in a way that is easy to read. So I know that a lot of career services will say, make sure it's only on 1 page. And I totally agree with that in the sense of be disciplined about highlighting the most relevant experience that makes you an attractive candidate for that specific role. If you're having trouble condensing all of those points, keep the size 11 or 12 font, keep the spacing, and just go on to 2 pages. It's not an end-all, be-all line, like hard line there. So the point of that is be disciplined about what you're choosing to highlight don't make it size 9 font, because a lot of the people are going to be, reading through a lot of resumes, and you want yours to stand out. The other thing I'll highlight is we look for people who know the organization and know the role. So using the resources at your disposal, namely the website, the job description. The job description is there and can serve as a template for you to basically create your resume and create your cover letter. So say, okay, if we are looking for these 5 characteristics or these 5 experiences, you can literally copy and paste that language, put it into your cover letter and say, I have this, here's my example. So yes, you want to be creative. Yes, you want to show that you're a great writer in your cover letter, but most importantly, you want to answer the questions being asked, which is, do you have the experience that we are looking for? And do you know who we are and why we're looking for this experience? And I think the third point is would be on kind of key characteristics. The 3 that come to mind for me are, 1, are you professional? Do you come across as professional? Would we feel comfortable and confident putting you in front of a client? If you're going to be also serving as our receptionist, are we confident in your ability to answer the phone professionally, create that warm and welcoming environment that just makes people feel right at home in our offices and really like working with us? The second would be, are you reliable? Are you going to do what you say you will do within the timeline you say it? So highlighting experience of where you've had to do that in the past and making sure that comes through in your resume, your cover letter, or your interviews, so that when your boss assigns you something, they can, what we call at West Exec is fire and forget, meaning they fire off the email to you and then they don't have to think about it because they know it's going to get done. And so related to that point would be the third characteristic, which I think Aisha pointed out too, is if your boss says something, yes is the answer, but not necessarily that begrudging, like, I guess I could. Having a can-do attitude where you are not only actually lightening the load of your supervisor or would-be team, but you make it feel easy. So a lot of folks have talked about there's going to be administrative work involved in entry-level positions. Like, most of the time, there's no way around it. And nobody feels good about assigning someone something that they know they don't want to do. So by just saying, like, yes, absolutely, I will take that on, I'll get it done. Again, with the firing, forgetting, confirming receipt, like, no problem, I've got it. That goes a really long way. And so with that, I think too, committing to the position, I'll wrap up right after this. The downside and kind of the thing that does not work for candidates is when you are interviewing or in your cover letter kind of thinking about the next step and what will come after this role. So it's not so much a, yes, I want to do this role. Yes, I can do everything you are going to ask me in this role. It's kind of like, yes, I'll do that, but to get to this other thing. And that just doesn't work because we need somebody who's 100% committed to that role and willing to do whatever comes their way really, really well. So with that, I will zip it and pass it off.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, I am going to ask if we can keep our answers a little more brief because I know we want to get to one more round of questions and then have time for Q&A at the end. So Aisha, please take the stage.
Yeah, I want to echo everything that Kim said. I want to sort of shift what I look for someone to fill a substantive role and not sort of an admin role. But everything that Kim said applies to whatever role you're in. Starting with sort of the hard skills of what I think it's important. And I just want to add that if you're someone who if you're right out of college and like doesn't think they want to do scheduling or any sort of operational work now, I don't know if we're going to get to this later, then you should really think about going to grad school, because like when you're in DC, like that's what tends to happen pretty much right off the bat. But this is more, I'm going to give you some tips on, sorry, Neda.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to also build on this question by bringing up that grad school bit. That was one of the things we actually talked about a lot yesterday in our Forming the Future conversation was, is grad school really required? And so as we go through this question of what do you look for and what are some of the mistakes, it would be actually great to hear your opinions too on, is grad school something you do think is required for this field? And should it be, right? So, but
Sure.
please continue.
So you want us to add that to our answer?
Yeah, that would be, I think you
Okay.
kind of touched on it already, but I would love
So
to
I'll
hear
do
you
that really
expand.
quick. So,
Yeah.
so what I said is where I stand on that. I think if you want to go into the national security and foreign policy field in a substantive way and really become, you know, known on a certain issue, whether it's, I don't know, the Syrian civil war versus, you know, what's happening in China with the semiconductors, you've got to really demonstrate your expertise either through research and analysis and getting published, or going and getting a master's or going to law school, really, or a PhD. Those are the sort of the three routes that I've seen. To sort of enter the being taken serious at that sort of level. I'm sure it's been done without a master's. I'm looking at my co-panelists without a graduate degree. I just don't know any off the top of my head. I think I did my master's right after undergrad, and so, you know, really sort of hit that substantive track really early, and kept building on that. So I think if you don't do it early enough, well, it's up to you. You can do whatever you want, but at some point, if you are interested in substantive work, you should maybe think about getting some sort of graduate training. So hard skills that I look for personally, and I'm a senior director at a similar consulting firm to what Kim was describing. So I think at the base level, everybody is fairly smart, right? Like, we know you're smart, great, but what I want to see is like real hard deliverables. So how is your writing? Are you able to break down pretty complicated topics into digestible tidbits for the client or the principal, whoever it is? And it has to be persuasive and compelling and organized, and not just like regurgitated news, some real analysis. So I think working on your writing is always really important. I think really knowing your issue. So I tend to really focus on the Middle East for my clients. And so those are the issues that I really tend to follow strategically. When someone asks me questions about China, I'm like, I don't talk to that senior director. It's not something that I'm going to meetings on or really know all the experts. Maybe I could make some general comments on it, but I tend to go deep on an issue and really know it. So I think you've got to think about if you want to be a generalist or if you want to really know an issue quite well. I know Kim said this, but be professional. I am astounded. I'm old. I think maybe all of us panelists are old, but like, I didn't grow up in the social media age. Facebook came around my senior year. I mean, Twitter and I don't even know what all the other ones, but it's not something that I really sort of grew up with. Not to say that being on these platforms means that you're not professional, but what I'm trying to say is, I think when I interview some young candidates, sometimes everybody wants to be sort of take on this sort of influencer role within the foreign policy field or the national security field. So if you tweet 40 words or however, I've never tweeted, however many words into something, that's going to mean something. And it's great, you're contributing to the dialogue, but I think what I really look for is someone who is professional in every sense, physical presentation, how they interact with people, how they treat other people, not just the important people that they're working for, but everybody. The softer skills, I don't know why they're called soft skills, but a high emotional intelligence, I think, is very, very important and carries so much weight, especially in the private sector. Showing initiative, just like taking things off your boss's plate, like Kim was saying, no questions asked. I shouldn't have to ask you. You just got to do it. And then integrity, which I think people forget, but character is everything. And as you go throughout your career, in Washington is a very small town, and every job or thing that I've sort of done has been because someone was like, call Aisha or do this or recommended me for something. So remember that as you go into your career, that people really remember how you behave, how you handle the situation. Your word is your honor and your bond, and I think people forget that. But I think a lot of folks in Washington are still pretty old school, so just think about that when you're sort of going about your job search.
Thank you, Aisha. And I think Angela is next.
Yeah, so I'm looking back at the questions so I can remember what I'm answering. I think when it comes to entry-level positions, especially where, at my organization, the biggest thing is definitely going to be your ability to write, for sure. And so I think that it's understood also that people applying for these roles are probably not going to have a lot of work experience. And so I feel like I want to make it clear that I personally, my philosophy is that that's okay. I don't think that, you need to have like thousands of, years of experience to do, especially an entry-level job. So I think what really, I've gotten people asking me before, what should I do if I don't have a lot of experience to speak to this particular role? And my thing is just make sure, like Kim was saying, tailoring your resume to things that are as relevant as possible, essentially. And that's where your cover letter really has to be the thing that shines, because your resume is not going to have a whole lot on it. So I think that if you've ever participated in any projects, if you've ever had your name associated with anything that has anything to do with the program that you're trying to work for or work with, speak to that definitely. And that is really what's going to be your ticket in. Outside of that, I think everything else, that people have said is pretty accurate. Definitely being somebody who is flexible, because there's going to be a lot of administrative work, a lot of, about doing events, making sure we have different opportunities to facilitate panel, discussions, things like that. So it's just being kind of a jack of all trades in a way. I think that one of the biggest mistakes that some people make definitely is applying for the role. And then when you speak to them on the phone, in a phone screen, them telling you, I actually want to do global health, even though they applied for an education role. And it's okay, make sure that the role that you're applying for is actually what you want to do, because we will assume that you're not actually interested in this job. And so you're not going to do that great at it because you're not invested in it or interested in it. And so that's kind of make sure that you're applying for something that you actually are interested in doing, because it will come off. Usually it comes out after the last question, oh, so you have any questions for me? And the answer is yeah, so how do I get involved in this other program that you guys have? And it's well, this is not the role for that. So you'll have to wait for a job to open up in that area. So it's just being aware that we can tell when you're not actually interested in the job at hand. So, save our time, spare yourself some time, and just only apply for things that you actually know that you want to do. I will say that grad school, I'm just looking at the question. So grad school, I personally don't think that it is necessary, especially for these roles. For CGD specifically, you don't need a master's degree to do a lot of the work that is done. And I'm speaking for my organization specifically. So it depends on where else you might go, but often and it's unfortunate, and I think that we're working on that as an org right now, is in the job description, we asked for our RAs to have a master's degree or like to see that. And I think that that lends to people actually being overqualified for the role and doing work that is actually underneath their skill set. And so I think that when you're applying for a role, especially at CGD, make sure that you actually look at what's being asked that needs to be done work-wise and thinking, do I need a master's degree for this? Or do I think that this is going to be like something that is beneath me or whatever? It might sound kind of cringy when I'm saying this, but I'm just like, be honest with yourself and ask yourself if this is something that you think you should apply to. Because for me personally, I don't think that some of the roles that we have require a master's degree, especially when there's lack of mid-level positions. We don't really have very many of those. And so it's like, if you come in at an entry level with a master's, you expect to advance. And if there's not any room to like move to the middle, then it's like, what am I doing here, sort of a thing. So you just want to make sure that, you're looking at the job description, you're looking at the pay, and you're considering for yourself, is this something that I want to invest my time and energy into, or should I look elsewhere? I guess that's what I'll say.
Thank you for that, Angela. And Christina, I'm sorry, ask you to be brief because we have about 15 minutes left, and I would love to get to the questions in the chat.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely be brief. And I think the advice you've gotten from everyone else on this panel, it will be helpful anywhere you go. And I think I'm going to repeat what others have said, but I do think it's important from the nonprofit perspective, specifically, these issue-based advocacy organizations, if you're interested in getting into that space. A big question I ask myself when I'm looking at employee to join our team is, do they align with our values? How well do they fit into what we do as an organization? That is extremely important. If you aren't showing me in your resume and your cover letter and our conversations that you care deeply about the 20-point issue agenda that we put out at the beginning of every Congress, probably not going to bring you on our team. And it's just that I think is pretty unique to the nonprofit kind of advocacy space, but just generally is good advice regardless of what sector you're going into. Like Kim and others said, look into what this company or organization does. Make sure that you are fully aware of the work they're doing and that you're willing to kind of get involved in that work. I'll also just say from the nonprofit sector, specifically for small organizations, that can-do attitude, that ability to roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty, be humble. Don't put yourself, I've licked envelopes, I've stapled papers, like that's the job. We've got to get stuff done. Be willing to do that, because to be completely frank, like no one's gonna really like you if you're the person who's like, no, like that's beneath me. I'm not, licking envelopes today. Well, the envelopes need to be licked, so someone's got to do it. So have that attitude, be positive, and know the organization and be passionate. Those are two big things for me.
Yeah, I'll say that can-do attitude goes very far. I mean, even, my first job out of law school, like representing clients, I still did admin work. And I remember having an intern who refused to do admin work. And that came up as in like one of our employment conversations later with like staff, as like, would we hire this person? They weren't willing to file papers. Meanwhile, I'm filing my own case files here. So I am going to toss it to Katie to wrap us up and get to the question in the chat. I know we have about 15 minutes, so Katie.
Yeah, hopefully we can tackle a few of these questions. I want to point out in the poll, so almost 60% of people that answered said that visibility into the field and available opportunities is one of their biggest challenge or obstacle. And the other 30% said getting resume and cover letter right. So I think we've covered a lot of the resume stuff, but this visibility might be something that people want to bring up in the questions. I'd be interested to hear more. And if you want to ask your question on video or audio, you can click to request to join in the top right, I think, and we'll let you in to ask your question. But first, we have a question from Marissa that I think is really great, that touches on what we were just talking about with admin. So She says, what advice would you have for someone in an admin position that is strictly admin who wants to try to shift into a more substantive role? How can we prepare for that role? You touched on grad school, but any other advice? Obviously, this is a big deal because, like you said, there are a lot of entry-level admin positions, but that's not necessarily what people are getting into this field to do. So maybe we don't need to go around, and have everyone answer, but if anybody has something brief they want to add there. And then if you have another question, please either ask it in the chat or request to join, and we'll put you in at that time.
I can chime in here from my perspective, at least. I think what you'll find in the nonprofit field is that the admin and substantive sometimes become combined roles. So, having the admin experience and just constantly putting yourself in the conversation, right? Having conversations with your colleagues who do work on substantive issues, raising your hand if someone needs assistance on that specific issue, and kind of talk about a little bit more than just that, the meetings you're scheduling or the research you're doing, but what is kind of just asked to take on more and more. And I think, you'll slowly start to be seen as the person who, okay, Marissa was really helpful on this issue. Let me think about her the next time I've got a report to do or the next time I have a meeting. And I'll also say, just for grad school, I went to grad school. I do not work in a substantive position in that, I'm engaged in our policy process, but I'm not an expert on any one of our policy issues. And I still thought that there was a lot of value to grad school. I see it as it was very helpful for me in my career in terms of the people I met, the people who know me and trust me and vouch for me. Is that worth, $100,000 or however much it costs to go to grad school? Probably not. So just, everyone's got to make their own personal financial decisions, and I'll leave that to you all. But I don't think it is the only way to get into that substantive role, or that if you go to grad school, you've got to be, an issue-based expert. So, it's a personal decision, really.
I want to add something quick on that. If I don't want to take away time from our panelists, but the grad school question, like Christina mentioned, can be extremely financially prohibitive depending on your situation, especially in the U.S. And it is in a lot of, grad school can add a lot of value. It's very unfortunate that a lot of these positions, even if they say they don't require it, you're competing with people who have masters, and it's very difficult to get in without. I will say one option I think is underexplored is grad school abroad. I went to grad school in South Korea, where I went to what I believe is the most expensive grad school there, which was $7,000 a year. I didn't even have to pay for that because there are a ton of scholarships available. Fulbright provides scholarships, which is very prestigious, to go to a lot of universities abroad. So you can have that name on your resume. You can have, experience abroad, which is extremely important in this field. It's a kind of a way to kill a few birds with one stone. So I think that is an option that's also kind of overlooked. I think Aisha said that you went to grad school in the UK. So that's something to look into that I think a lot of people don't consider. That might be a little bit more accessible. But
I could add to that too, actually, really, really quickly. I will say that along those same lines, just looking at what you need in order to kind of move into a more substantive role and seeing if there's like a certification program for it, and just doing that and getting the credentials essentially and moving up. So I actually took a eCornell Diversity and Inclusion HR certificate course last year. And so now I have Cornell University on my resume essentially, and it took me like 4 months to do it. So something to keep in mind, as you try to advance your
Angela, I would like to follow up with you because I looked at that course and was on the fence. So I want to talk to you about that. But so my 2 cents, I do not have a grad degree. And I also want to address Stephanie's question related to networking, because I think this is something we haven't talked about yet on this panel. And it is the answer to so many things. We're talking, so if your challenges are getting the cover letter, getting the resume right, reach out to folks in your network or who are in the space you're trying to go to. Have an informational interview with them just to learn about it. And then as a follow-up action, you can ask for their help to take a look at your resume and point out, like, I it's stupid. I love resume reviews. I'm terrible at writing my own, but I can tell you, like, advocate for yourself. You've done this. Have you been on a sports team? That relates in this way. Think creatively. So just ask for help. If you're trying to, same thing, if you're trying to get visibility, ask people who are there. Most of the time, and this is something that I think in terms of inclusion, I never knew you could ask. Like, I work with Michelle Flournoy, who was our former Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, and Tony Blinken, who is now our Secretary of State. You can find these people and ask for meetings, for mentorship conversations, and chances are they will say yes. Like, so just ask. If you see someone cool, like, it feels so good to get a response like, hey, I think what you've done is extremely cool, and I would like to learn how you did it and seek any advice. And I think too, in terms of moving within your organization, make it known that you want to move at the appropriate time, right? We talked about you don't want to kind of hop into a role and then immediately try to shift over. But once you've been there for a year, having those conversations, and not even a year, but just having those regular conversations with your supervisor, with a mentor, with a sponsor, so that they know what you want. A lot of times we think, oh, everyone knows what I want because it's so obvious. Everyone is focused on themselves, their trajectory. So put it out there, make it known. And like everyone in this panel is saying, say yes to opportunities and just keep being there and popping in and saying, hi, I'm here. I would love to help you on this. What do you need? So yeah, I think, and to the point of building a network in COVID, a lot of times we think of networking as like walking into this room filled of people and you need to go introduce yourself with your name tag and make small talk. Your network, like, we are now a part of your network. You came to this session, reach out to any of us on LinkedIn, through email, through WCAP's OrgsinSolidarity. If, yes, Katie, if you have family members, if you have friends, like, you don't need to go cold and far. Start close and build one out. Networking is relationship building, it's friends. Everybody has that uncle or cousin or random connection to this really cool person or organization. Just have like a learning mentality, have a friendship building mentality, and that is definitely a way that you can connect during these weird, difficult times.
Can I I'm so sorry, but I just want to add to this question. What would you say to people that just feel super awkward networking, that are very introverted and, just have trouble? It can be a very intimidating process. What would you say to that?
I would say everyone's awkward. Take a deep breath and just do the thing, because honestly, especially virtually, it's super weird. I feel very awkward right now, and it's fine. So it's like, just kind of like do it and put yourself out there, because what's really the worst that can happen? Even if you stutter, even if you like get like sweaty pits, whatever, it's like, we're all feeling the same weird, tense emotion. So just kind of put yourself out there, because literally there's no other way that you can network. You have to reach out to somebody. And actually being virtual makes it easier because you don't have to be directly in their face. So shooting an email or someone writing in the chat, if they want to like hit me up afterward, boom, bam, it's done. We've networked. So, we can go from there. So.
Should plug in. I think there is another networking session after this. Is there, Nida? Yes. So if you just hop over to that networking tab on the left, you can practice these skills.
I'll also just say on networking, and I'm an introvert, and I think very few people that I work with really think that I'm an introvert, because a lot of my job is frontward facing and connecting with people. And I think it's really tough to overcome that. And I think Kim had good advice in the chat. Start with your friends, like, practice with them, and, use the people that you already know to introduce you into someone else. It becomes a little bit less awkward. Look at people as human beings. There's a lot of really wonderful people, like Kim was saying, Michelle and Flournoy and Tony Blinken, who I've worked with before, and I'm just like so nervous to talk to them. And then when you talk to them, you're like, this is another human. I can, have a conversation and you get through it. And the worst thing that's going to happen is like you try and connect with someone and they don't answer, or they say they're too busy, and that's okay. You know, life moves on. They're not mad that you reached out. It's not awkward. You've got other people you can go to. So I know it's easier said than done, but just really try and push yourself to kind of overcome that awkwardness and fear.
Definitely. I'll echo that, Christina, and just the remembering so much of the business place and the professional world is about people. So connecting with people, remembering we're all people, bringing your humanity into the conversations. Like Michelle, for example, will talk to hundreds of people. She's not necessarily going to be the type of person drilling down on your specific expertise, but she will remember if she was able to connect with you, if you presented as a well-intentioned, smart professional. So just bringing it back to people and focusing on that. And I think it was Melissa who put a question in there. I don't have a succinct way of answering this, but I would be, if you want to follow up by email, I'd be happy to chat about that as well.
So I do see people trying to get onto the stage, but we have about 3 minutes left. I want to give each of our panelists a second to sort of wrap up with their last remarks. And I'm sorry, we actually don't have networking after this. We have our closing remarks on the main stage.
I'm sorry for the
No, it was my mistake as well. So we have closing remarks after this, but I would love to hear our panelists kind of give 30 seconds to close out these last 2 minutes. Any last thoughts on early career?
I'll start really quick. Networking, I hate networking. I don't think I ever really did it. But what I did do is be really good at my job, and then people notice. So I feel all of you who, I think it's great that there are no networking events personally, but I have my network, so I can imagine it's probably a little difficult. But I think if you're someone who just wants to like do a really good job, people will notice. And so just keep your head down and work hard, and things work out. It's not always about like, I've seen people use networking in the wrong way, which is they think they can get something out of someone by meeting certain people. But what you want to do is really just become very good at your job and contribute to the world and be good citizens, and you'll be fine.
I just want to say really quickly, our applications are open for the Summer Delegates Program for this summer, 2021. Wow, I don't know what year it is anymore. 2021. So please go over to our page. I'll probably just put it in the chat and apply. If you are interested, we're going to be bringing on a cohort of 5 students. And it'll be 8 weeks. It's paid and it's 100% virtual this summer. So yeah, please feel free, flare forth.
I also just gave a plug in the chat. We're also hiring for our summer fellowship or internship program. So please apply. Drop my email in there too. Feel free to reach out. I think Maher in the chat saying that you guys are all networking right now, and this is a networking event. You've taken that step to connect with people like us and get engaged and become a part of this this community in this field. So you're already taking like that first step in the right direction. And I encourage everyone to look into the nonprofit sector and get engaged in this space, in the advocacy space. It's a lot of fun. It's really rewarding. And we'd love to have you join us. So.
Thank you all so much. I think this has been really great. Definitely has reminded me of some things to keep doing as an early career professional. And I think almost all of us, if not all of us, have now dropped our emails in the chat. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I love talking to people about this stuff. So please reach out and we can continue these conversations. And just thank you again so much to all of our panelists and to everyone that tuned in to listen. And thanks for attending the conference.
Fun.
Everyone.
See you all on the main stage.